1 week, 3 mass shootings, and now the FBI is looking at all 3 to determine whether the shooter's ideology motivated the violence, escalating concerns over domestic terrorism. In Dayton, Ohio, authorities say the gunman was exploring violent ideologies, and his former girlfriend says he heard voices that told him to hurt others. In El Paso, a domestic terror investigation is already underway because of the online manifesto attributed to the suspect. And late Tuesday, the FBI opened a domestic terrorism investigation into last week's mass shooting at the Gilroy Garlic Festival, where 3 people were killed. Officials say the suspect had what appeared to be a target list, including religious groups, both political parties and government locations, and had been exploring violent ideologies. NBC's Justice correspondent Pete Williams joins me now. Pete, look, domestic terrorism is not new to the FBI. We've seen and we know that they've investigated attacks motivated by white supremacy or far-right extremism, but technically what qualifies as domestic terrorism? And given all the pressure that's out there now to do something, is there any early indication that there might, for example, be a reallocation of resources toward domestic terrorism?
So the declaration of something as a possible act of domestic terrorism is simply something that gives the FBI jurisdiction. In all of these attacks, murder itself is not a federal crime. So the FBI enters these cases in support of the local authorities. For example, in Texas, they've already said they're going to prosecute him under Texas murder statutes. But by conducting a parallel investigation and saying that there's a possibility of domestic terrorism, it gives the FBI its own jurisdiction separate from the local. So the FBI can use a grand jury, get subpoenas. They have more investigative resources. There's not going to be a domestic terrorism charge itself because there isn't a domestic terrorism statute. It's mentioned in the law books, but it's simply a definition, and that's what gives the FBI jurisdiction. So that's the significance here. In Gilroy, they say that he was looking at potential targets, including federal courthouses, federal buildings, political parties, other organizations, possibly a hit list in addition to the Gilroy Festival that he ultimately attacked. But they also say he had a combination of ideologies, violent ideologies that he was looking at, sometimes conflicting ones. And we've seen this in recent years, where people who are interested in violence look at all kinds of different inspirations. And for that reasons, the FBI says they're not ready to say whether or not you could classify the gunman in this case as a white supremacist. And by the way, Chris, just a footnote here. NBC News has decided that we're not going to give the names of these gunmen in any of these cases from now on. This is another recent trend. Law enforcement, sometimes you'll hear, will come out and say, we're not going to mention the person's name. We do that early on, but we've decided not to mention the names anymore.
So, Pete, I have read quite a bit over the last couple of days about how much money goes toward fighting, for example, Islamic terrorism versus domestic terrorism, and some questions already being raised about whether more focus needs to go here. And obviously, this has shaken many Americans to their core to see these back-to-back-to-back shootings. Having said that, is there any significant rise in domestic terrorism, and might there be a change in the way that the FBI uses either its manpower or its money, frankly?
Yes, and yes with an asterisk. Yes, there's been a rise in domestic terrorism over the past several years. More people were killed in the U.S. last year in acts of domestic terrorism than in foreign-inspired terrorism. But here's the problem for the FBI and law enforcement. The terrorism statutes give the FBI jurisdiction to investigate people in foreign terrorism who are connected with specific groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Al-Shabaab, and so forth. In here at home, there's no specific group, and so it's harder for the FBI to have dots to connect, and that's why there are fewer resources.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.